Good afternoon, good evening to everybody around the world logging in for day 5 of TMF week. I'm going to give a little bit of time. I see Kim writing good morning, so I'm going to take that as a see and hear for the entire group, but would love just to see a couple more chats come through from the entire team. It has been a wonderful week so far. Certainly on the Montrim side, putting this together, I just want to give a very brief shout out to the entire marketing team who put this together. Those that you've seen that are behind the curtain and sometimes in front of the curtain, people like Kim, Oliver Pierce, Molly, the entire team at Montrim for helping this out, and of course, all of the speakers as well. And maybe that is a great segue into, day 5 of TMF week and the pleasure that I get to have for today's session. Kim, if you could advance. So today we are going to be talking about TMF metrics. They aren't just for marketing anymore, which I think is terrific. Metrics has definitely been a high topic of interest throughout the entire session. So before we jump into that, maybe just to do a little bit of housekeeping, and as usual, my name is Michael Pupil. It's a pleasure to see all of you. I work on the commercialization team here at Montrim and very proud to be part of this team. So again, all of these sessions are recorded and will be presented to all attendees at the end, including the slide decks. And of course, anybody attending will also receive that certificate of attendance. This is, once again, an interactive session. What I absolutely love and what Joanne and I were talking about before was, how to address the questions that are coming through. And if any are missed, we're going to do our best to try to give those back to the speaker to respond to them so that we can send them back to you. Those that are anonymous, maybe we'll find a way to post it, but please don't hold yourself back. Fire away with as many questions as you have. And of course, there is always the networking presentations at the end. I was telling Joanne earlier, I'm like, she has the anchor lead spot of standing in between what is the most difficult part of any conference, which is before the drinks or the pub session. And so today, following the session, shortly after, we have that pub quiz, tailing off towards the end. And so it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Kim, if you could advance. So a little bit about Joanne. So Joanne is the Director of Clinical Documentation Management at Regeneron Pharmaceuticals, and she is responsible for the TMF group and clinical archives and is the business process owner for the TMF. Throughout her 25-year career in life sciences, she's worked for diagnostics, biotechs, pharmaceutical companies, and CROs, and very, very well-rounded. She serves on the steering committee of the TMF Reference Model Group, and prior to that, she co-led the TMF Reference Model Change Control Board. And so I got the pleasure of seeing Joanne about a week ago face-to-face. It is a pleasure to see you virtually, Joanne. And what we'll do is we will flip into your session right now.
Thank you very much, Michael.
And here we go.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. As Michael said, we're talking about TMF metrics, and hopefully, since I'm between you and your evening beverage, I hope to make this very interesting and educational, and hopefully we'll have lots of chats afterwards. If you can go to the next slide, please. Just to let you know, these are my thoughts and ideas, that I'm not representing any company or organization that I'm associated with. So what are we going to talk about today? Really going to talk about the definition of some TMF metrics, going into how to operationalize some of these metrics, developing a metrics program, and then how they can be used to reduce risk. So if you can go to the next slide. So you've probably heard that more and more organizations are using metrics to manage their TMFs. So how does one get started? Each organization is different. So really what you need to do is talk to your organization. They may already have some metric program in place, and you can just plug right in with your TMF metrics. In some cases, you may not have a metrics program, and you have to really chat with people to find out what they're actually interested in measuring and how they intend to use this information. You may also want to look at what your challenges are. Are you having a particular issue with your TMF in a certain area? Do you have a problem with timeliness, or maybe quality, or maybe completeness, or maybe other things? It may be good to focus in on some of those things. Additionally, are you looking to use metrics to manage your clinical study or a program? Or are you looking to make some process improvements? Maybe you have a process that you know is really sort of clunky, and you want to establish a baseline so that you can get evidence to say, gee, we really need to change this process, and work with your management to do that. Or maybe you need to oversee your CROs and vendors. So you might want to have separate metrics for each CRO, or better yet, have the same metrics across all CROs so that you can compare and contrast. And then I guess, what do you want to report on? Are there certain things that your management would love to see? It's always important to keep all of your stakeholders in consideration and to find out exactly what they need and how they might like to have it. Next slide. So TMF metrics typically include a measurement of timeliness, of quality, and of completeness. And this is often referred to as TMF Health, or as I like to call it, QTC. Next slide. So here are some possible examples of what you might choose. In the area of quality, you might have error rates that result from some sort of a review. You could have the percentage of documents approved on the first pass, or perhaps the percentage or number of queries, duplicates, or even expired documents. In timeliness, this is sometimes a tricky one because you may need to define the time points that you are actually measuring. So are you measuring from the finalization of the document to when it's entered into the TMF? Do you have that all captured? Another possibility is the time that the document lands in the TMF and is promoted to an approved state after it's been QC'd. Additionally, you may also want to measure something like the query response rate. So from the time that the query was created to when it was resolved. Next slide. Additionally, there are other metrics. So in addition to some of the TMF health metrics, you may actually want to consider the number of documents submitted per day, per month, per year. This could give you some very interesting information, especially if you parse it out and figure, okay, for maybe certain functional areas, for your CROs, it could potentially tell you some information. Additionally, you may want to look at your number of queries and start to look into the numbers by study, by vendor or department, or even by type, because this may also tell you if you have areas where you need to beef up. So maybe in one particular area, some of your instructions aren't too clear, or maybe a group needs some retraining. This type of information will give you a clue as to what actions you really need to do. Additionally, various time point measurements are very helpful because this gives you an idea of maybe where you can make some process improvements, or maybe where you do need some retraining. It all depends on what the numbers are actually showing you and what you're trying to measure, to really take a look at it and use that information appropriately. Next slide. When you have an idea of exactly what you want to measure, probably, in my mind, the trickiest thing to do is to really come up with the appropriate threshold. What is that line that says, okay, you still need improvement, to, okay, you're doing fine? One thing to always go into as you're doing this is to remember nothing is cast in stone forever. You can always change your metrics if necessary, or your threshold. If you find that, gee, I thought this would be a good threshold, but they haven't been able to meet it for years, maybe you want to consider either another metric, or maybe you want to change your threshold. You know, it's sometimes good to revisit these to find out, gee, was this maybe too easy a metric, or maybe it's not measuring what we actually want. So to do this, reach out to all of your stakeholders. There are also industry resources out there. There's organizations that you can talk to find out if people have advice on what those thresholds might be, including at times some of the regulators. We've actually had inspectors who have told us, gee, that seems like a reasonable metric, or not. Your vendors and your CROs can tell you what they are using. Sometimes this is very helpful. Sometimes you may want to increase it a little. Other times you may also reach out to some of your colleagues, because they may have been at other companies where they've had a metrics program or used metrics, that they can say, gee, this worked well with us. Or maybe even tell you that seems too low or too high as a threshold, or stay away from that metric. It was just a nightmare trying to calculate. Additionally, when you're putting these thresholds in place, you may really want to think of what the implication is to the TMF itself. So if perhaps you're looking at an error rate, if you're looking at maybe a 5 or 10% error rate, you may want to think about what that might mean for your TMF. If you are saying that your TMF has a 10% error rate, and this could be hundreds of thousands of documents potentially that could have a problem, that may be sending the wrong message to your stakeholders. So just consider that as you're implementing those. Additionally, you should make sure that you're picking a reasonable goal, not necessarily what you're doing today. You may want to have it as a stretch goal so that you have something to work toward. It shouldn't be impossible, but it should be something that people with some good actions can achieve. And it's also very important to make sure that your stakeholders are in agreement with that threshold. As we implemented a number of metrics, we often reached out to our CROs and vendors, and they were typically very helpful in telling us this will work or this won't work. So please reach out to them and make sure that they provide you with some of that valuable information. Next slide. So when it comes to oversight, you're really looking to use metrics to reduce the risk, to hopefully catch any issues before they become really serious, to hopefully help you streamline or identify some of those inefficient processes, to also make sure, in some cases, that the activities are actually being conducted. It's good to keep an eye on those CROs and vendors. And additionally, it's very helpful to evaluate your vendor quality. So you know, not only are they doing what we want, but they're delivering the right quality. So your metrics can actually turn into key quality indicators, key performance indicators. You may want to work with your procurement group to actually include some of these in your contracts. And one area that we've recently begun to explore is including this in individuals' performance reviews. So to say, okay, we know that you are supposed to do things in the TMF area. Let's take a look at exactly what you've been doing. Next slide. So with all of this, how do you begin? You really know what you want to do, but how do you put it into place? So next slide. And then, so first of all, you really need to almost develop a little informal or formal, depending on your organization, implementation plan. The first thing you should probably look at is your TMF. What information do you already have in your TMF? What can you capture from this TMF? You certainly don't want to choose a lot of metrics that you have to manually track and calculate, but use your system fully. If your system doesn't have a good reporting tool, or maybe doesn't have a reporting tool at all, you may need to consider an additional software, such as a visualization package or some sort of reporting tool. And if so, you may need to reach out to your IT resources to help you implement that or get access to that, or link it up to your TMF so that you can actually use this in your metrics generation. Keep your plan small. It's okay to have a big wish list of metrics that you would like to use, but start small and add on. See how it goes before you launch into collecting pages and pages of metrics. You really want to set yourself up for success. As I said before, you really do need to speak with all of your stakeholders, but there's a number of reasons for that. Not only is it because you want to make sure everybody is comfortable with what is being calculated and reported, but there are other groups that you may not have spoken to previously that you now should include. And these would be your quality and vendor management groups. Make sure that they find value in this information, because they will be helping you spread the message. You may also need to negotiate with some of these stakeholders. I'll go into this in a few more slides, but there are times where we've had to set up a metric with some of our CROs. We had a certain threshold, and they basically came back and said, we can't meet that. And we had to negotiate and basically say, okay, well, we'd like to approach this metric at this threshold. Why don't we try doing it? And we'll revisit this in about a year. And if we're still not where we want to be, maybe we can come up with a different metric. It's also really important to have a single source of truth for your metrics that everybody can look at. So your vendors, your CROs, your internal staff, so they all know what the actual metrics are. There's no question that someone's looking at something differently than you are. So you can make sure that you're all singing basically from the same hymnal. And it's also important to develop sort of a little plan of when you expect to do what. So if you do need to bring in additional software, or you have some negotiations that you need to do with some of your CROs, you can sort of factor that in to your plan and be able to tell your senior management exactly when you will be publicizing some of these metrics. Next slide. Okay, so now you've got the plan. Probably the first and most important thing is to draft the actual metrics and see what they look like. This is going to cause a lot of discussion. You have a lot of people who maybe have never seen metrics before. Most people do think they're doing a fantastic job. Metrics don't always point that out upon the initial release. So you may need to, show them a sense of reality. There's also a lot of things, especially in some areas, where you may not be counting everything. For example, there may be some timeliness metrics that you are trying to come up with, that you have documents in your TMF that don't have dates on them. Well, you can't obviously measure those because you don't have anything to measure. So you may have to remove some of those documents from your calculation. There may be other types of documents that their processing is not straightforward, that you also have to remove because they just mess up the metrics, and there's no easy way to include them to get good metrics. So you'll have to work with your metrics or analytics person to really take a look at that and figure out what's in and what's out. And throughout this whole process, there will be a lot of discussion with your stakeholders so that they really understand what you are presenting to them. So there does need to be that establishment of trust. Everyone needs to feel comfortable about the metrics, that they can believe the metrics, and that you are not setting them up for failure. You're really trying to improve things. You are using the metrics as that tool to hopefully give them information that will make their job easier and result in a better TMF. Also noticing the audience of who is going to get these metrics is important, because you certainly would like to have the metrics as clear as possible so people understand exactly what they mean. But for some organizations who have never used metrics before, this may be a foreign concept for them. So there may need to be a lot of training as to what the metrics are saying, and then also what those metrics are implying, so that people know what they need to do. Additionally, you would like to have all of your metrics in alignment. So your study team metrics may be rolled up into the functional area metrics, or sliced and diced in your functional area metrics. You may also want to consolidate them for therapeutic areas, or for your CROs, or even for your senior management. They may want to see everything rolled together. So however you need to report them, you want them all in alignment. So everyone is getting the same story, and as they start to parse things out or look into the details, everyone's on the same page. Next slide. Okay. So once you start beginning to measure, you really need to socialize these, and not only to the study team, but to maybe your functional areas. You may need to tell your CROs, and you really need to have actions that they can do to improve their metric. Give them ideas of what things they could do. For example, if it's a timeliness metric and it's timeliness to the TMF and the metric is very poor, well, bringing those documents in sooner could improve the metric. Maybe easier said than done, though. This whole journey of improving metrics is not linear. You will have some improvements. You'll have some slides back. It hopefully over time will be going in the right direction, in the positive direction, so that there is an improvement, but it will take time, because this affects behavior. you've had people who maybe feel that the TMF is an end of study repository, and you feel that the TMF is an active TMF. It's going to take time to bring all of those end of study repository believers into a new vision and a new model of the TMF and get them headed in the right direction. So it is also something where people also want to see the trends. How did I do last month to what I'm doing now? So then next slide. You are going to need to do some sort of a trend analysis. People will want to see the metrics over time. So, okay, 6 months ago, where were we? Are we improving? Are we going up or are we going down? What does this actually mean? What do we really need to do? You also need to evaluate the risk and compliance. Okay, so this metric is going down a little. Is that really critical? Is it a risk to the study? You really need to dig into the details, find out what's going on, and then develop those action plans to fix the situation and get the metrics going in the proper direction. Next slide. Okay, as you do this, you really need to make sure that you are involving all of your stakeholders. That includes the vendors and your CROs. You may have the opportunity to do this at a study team level, or maybe a TMF to TMF group meeting, or even at a governance meeting. And again, it's very important to be aligned through all of these. It's also good to make sure that you've documented your metrics and thresholds in study plans. It's even more critical to make sure that you don't have misalignment across your study plans. So you don't want your communication plan to say, oh, everything can come in by the end of the study, and your TMF plan to say everything needs to come in within 30 days. You really need to make sure that you're all aligned. One of the things that we've recently begun doing is reaching out to our functional areas to make sure that they understand their roles with the TMF and what the metrics are actually showing in certain areas. It has indicated areas where there is a big misalignment, where we need more clarification, and the teams need more training. So we've been focusing more and more on that, and we have begun to see improvements in certain areas. One thing that we also had a problem with, we had a number of CROs. And certain CROs were doing well in certain metrics. So what we decided to do was to show them where they stood. So we provided them a blinded view of the metrics across all of the CROs and vendors. It was very eye-opening, and it gives them an idea of where they stand. So while in some cases they may have thought, gee, we're the top of the group here, they may not have been, and the data spoke for itself. So it's very helpful to see that. And it is a blinded view, so you're not really telling anybody who they are except for the groups individually. Additionally, you may also want to work with your contracts group to understand and maybe include some of this information in a contract. It is sometimes very difficult to do. I know with several companies that I've worked at, the law department never really liked including that because it's sort of a nebulous type of thing. But if your metric is really data-based, it should be easy to include some of that in your contracts. Next slide. And then next slide. Thanks. So you're probably wondering, while metrics are a big thing now in the TMF area, are they required by regulation? And no, not really. The regulations and guidelines really focus on risk management, oversight of your vendors, and making sure that your essential documents are in your TMF as soon as possible. And metrics can really help with this. The EMA guidance really focuses on, our single TMFs. It talks about being contemporaneous and also referring to, that virtual TMF concept. So one thing that you may also want to consider is, so while we're doing these things in the TMF system itself, what about those other systems that you are pointing to? How are those factoring into some of your metrics? Have you considered that? Next slide. Well, I think we probably all know that we need to be always inspection ready. And I've often told my group that, the TMF is everyone's friend during an inspection. But usually after the inspection's over, we're not on the Christmas card list anymore. We are not someone that they want to see coming down the hallway. But really, we should be, because those metrics are very helpful in managing your study and can really give the study team a sense of calm and peacefulness when that next inspection pops up. Next slide. So some additional things that you probably need to consider. The TMF is really a portion of the company asset. Everyone always considers the clinical database as being very important to a product if it's going to be sold or brought in-house or whatever. But they don't always think the same as about the TMF. And without the TMF, that clinical data is not as valuable as it could be. So the two have to go hand in hand. It also does a lot in the oversight of your study and your vendor partners. So you make sure that not only are they delivering what is needed, but they are doing it with quality, on time, and as you absolutely need it. Using metrics can also help in doing things in a risk-based approach. Oftentimes in the past, people would say, oh, well, we'll just review everything before it goes where it's needed. But with today's studies, the volume of information, it's not possible to do that. So you really need to take a risk-based approach and reduce some of your work to dealing with the important stuff. It can also be used to help communicate better with the team, and it can focus the QC and attention to where it's actually needed. So if you never have a problem with a certain functional area because they have a good process, do you need to do a lot of work in their area for every single study? Maybe you don't. Maybe you do a spot check, do some other things, and your metrics will tell you that. And additionally, as I think you probably heard by now, the metrics definitely tell you areas where you can improve. So it's really important for that. Next slide. So just to summarize, metrics are really important for oversight and for risk reduction. I would encourage you all, if you don't have a program currently, start small and grow. Get your feet wet, feel comfortable, get your groups so that they are feeling confident about your metrics, and add on as you go. And make sure that you align and socialize metrics internally and externally. And next slide. I really liked this. So the best way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. So Let's hear it from metrics. Thank you all.
Thank you, Joanne. That was fantastic. I think one of the most important things as we flip through some of the slides here, Kim, if you want to bring up the next one. There we go. We do have a number of questions. I think it's absolutely critical, and I think there is definitely a difference, and I think you'd agree with me, with just data and then metrics, and all with the goal of being able to take action. In maybe just a very, broad question for you, Joanne. A number of organizations here all have, some sort of KPIs, some sort of metrics. Everybody manages data. In your experience, what would you recommend as some of the, top metrics that you look at that help this process for TMF Health? If you can share. I'm not asking for
Sure.
the caramel secret, but for sure something that you found some tips and tricks on.
Sure. We do have TMF Health metrics. We have 6 metrics that we use. We align all of our study teams, therapeutic areas, CROs, they're all aligned. So we roll them up or roll them down as necessary, but we do have timeliness. And this is one that we have struggled with, partly because we are looking from the finalization of the document to when it hits the TMF. And that is a long period of time when you consider site documents. So we're still refining that one a little bit more. One that I particularly like in the quality area is the number of duplicates. And our system is actually able to tell us that. And it is one that we have used across a number of our CROs. At one point, we had one CRO that had like 24% duplicates in the TMF. We're saying that we like to have closer to 2%, so they had quite a ways to go. And over time, they've brought it down. So they had to refine their processes to do it, but they were able to do that. We also have a completeness metric. And that one wasn't so good, maybe about a year ago, but we focused a lot of attention on it and refined our general process. And over time, it has improved significantly. So it's now almost always green when it goes up to upper management. So
I think, Regeneron obviously is in a unique case, or some of the experience that you've had in your roles, where you're working with multiple CROs, and oftentimes that means you're having to repeat the workflow or the process or the conversation. If you have 5 different entities, you're going to have that conversation 5 different times. Have you found that most in the industry have similar metrics that they have put together, or are you finding that the conversation is starting from scratch every single time?
We've been using the same group of CROs for a number of years.
Yeah.
So let's see what each one had some different metrics, I guess, not ones that we were necessarily interested in. They also calculated them a little bit differently than we wanted calculated. So we really had to work with them to say, okay, we're going to standardize across everybody so that we were not looking at, CRO A's metrics and then having to readjust for CRO B's. We would have them all the same, so it was easier for our study teams and our management to see. So we had a lot of discussion, a lot of review and re-review of metrics. And then one of the things that we did start to implement was we not only have individual CRO meetings with, from TMF to TMF, but we also have a meeting that is TMF to all of our CROs in the room at the same time. So we don't talk about any specific metrics with each individual group at that meeting, but we do show them where they stand in a
vis-a-vis
blind
everybody else.
fashion. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
And
Right.
that is very helpful.
Sure, I would imagine, especially with a number of CROs, if you're ranking last in certain areas, that may be, the fire that is lit that, either spurs change to adjust the way that they are, analyzing the data or carrying out the metrics in order to complete a certain KPI so that action can then be followed. And I think that's the theme of metrics, right? The reason for the collection of data and applying metrics to it is so that it allows those functional teams that you were talking about to make a decision or take action on, a particular thing. And like you were saying before, if there's a group that has been functioning well, does that require, so much oversight? And perhaps not. Perhaps it requires a spot check, at least a tune-up, so to speak, for what you're looking for. So it's a very, very interesting approach. And I'm sure in the audience today, we have both organizations that have multiple partners, and also organizations that may rely on one, CRO. But I think the process is exactly the same, whether you're looking at one or many, is what I'm getting from this.
Yeah.
We did get a question here from Sandra. Are all your TMF metrics automated from the eTMF system? If there are some, the system, excuse me, I just had a little pop-up that blocked the question. If there are some that systems cannot produce, how are you calculating those and providing them? E.g., Excel, PowerPoint, etc.
We generate most of the metrics from our eTMF directly. We also found out that our teams were interested in additional metrics that we were not able to get from our eTMF. So we use a visualization tool and pull in even more data from other systems to actually come up with even a more robust level of metrics. So now we're able to bring in like timelines and some information from some other systems that we weren't able to do before, because we're now using a system that is supplemental to the eTMF.
Right. I will say, just on behalf of all vendors, not just monitoring, but most of the time vendors are data geeks, data nerds. I'm a self-proclaimed one myself. So Sandra, to your question, and Joanne, to your comment, I think TMF vendors, especially monitoring, try to provide as much reporting as possible, as many metrics as possible, to allow the flexibility for you to say, well, if this is really important, this is how you could pull it out. But I would open this question out, to the entire group. Maybe not to answer right now, but to the entire group, that if there are metrics that you want to be able to decision on, or data that you want to be able to pull to create a metric, that is probably the best thing that you can communicate with your vendors, because creating that automated process, to Sandra's point, makes life a lot easier on being able to pull that data to allow you to make a decision. And that's where the partnership really comes in between let's say sponsor and CRO and vendor and technology, and where the rubber meets the road. So fantastic answer, Joanne. Sandra, thank you for helping to close that out. I think it was a really great question. At this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to transition over. And Joanne, thank you for anchoring the session today. It was a pleasure to see you virtually as well as face-to-face last week. And like I said, you had the daunting task of sitting in between the trivia pub quiz and the next session. So as we move forward into this, guys, I think that there is another networking break that is coming up. So I'd encourage everybody to kind of touch base. Certainly reach out to anybody. I know that there were a few questions that we may not necessarily have been able to get to. So I think, Joanne, you're on the session, and if anything comes our way, we'd love to be able to get that over to you. So on this wonderful Friday, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you for the attention on a Friday. I hope you all have a great weekend and look forward to seeing you at the pub quiz later today.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.